Raja Jackson, the son of Quinton Rampage Jackson, has gone viral recently for his attack on pro wrestler Syko Syko Stu, in a pro wrestling stunt gone completely wrong. In this clip, you can see Raja enter the wrestling ring, elevates Syko Stu onto his shoulder, then turn and body slam him so hard that Stewart is immediately knocked unconscious by the slam. But it gets worse, because then Raja then continues to unload these full force, full contact punches. Raja got off at about 20 punches on the unconscious Syko Stu. Now, what I'd like to do is give you an objective analysis of what happened in that ring, and then probe how certain events led up to that happening, and then probe why that might have happened. I'm going to avoid labeling Raja and Rampage as people. I'm also going to avoid using adjectives to describe their behavior, simply because I don't feel that either of those moves this discussion any further. I'm speaking from the point of view as a professional fighter. My name's D Hamaguchi. I am a pro boxer. You can see a number of my fights on the YouTube channel by the same name, Hamaguchi Fight. I'm also a former elite judoka, so I understand the difference between sparring and a kata, meaning something that's not cooperative, versus an activity like a kata that is completely cooperative. I also understand a little bit about brain science because I'm a professional educator. I've worked with young people ages 3 to over 18 for well over a decade. So I've witnessed in the trenches, how young people can interact with each other in healthy ways, occasionally not so healthy ways, and what types of measures we put in place as educators to try to mediate and then move a young person along in their sort of emotional behavioral development. So those are the lenses I'd like to use to look at this situation. Now, I have to give a bit of a disclaimer. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a licensed mental health professional. So I don't pretend to diagnose or give prognosis. I'm simply giving my interpretation based on my own experience. So I also have to say, if you're going through a difficult time right now, feeling a little bit sad or down from, say, some of the bad news that you've been reading in current events, then my recommendation is just click off of this right now. It'll always be posted. You can always come back to it and listen to it when you're in a slightly better mood. But unfortunately, this podcast is there's not really any uplifting, joyful moments or observations here. It's a discussion that some people might find disturbing because it involves physical violence and ill will. So, as I said, if you're not up to it, that's cool. Just click off. I don't need your view time if you're not feeling up to it. I'd rather you did something to make yourself feel a little happier today. All right. So that being said, let's take a look at 4 things that did happen in that little clip that may or may not have gotten pointed out to you just yet. So the first thing I think that's important to note is that when Raja approaches Syko Stu from behind and then shoots in for what we call a single leg, meaning Raja grabs one of Syko Stu's legs with both of his arms, Syko Stu actually helps Raja elevate him. Now, Syko Stu looks like he weighs probably 250 or maybe more pounds. So what Syko Stu does is he posts with his hand on Raja's back. That helps with leverage. It just helps Raja get Syko Stu draped over Raja's shoulder, right? So this is an act of cooperation. Now, Raja doesn't read that, and he turns 180 and slams Syko Stu as hard as he can onto the canvas. Syko Stu, I think, is immediately unconscious because he's struck the back of his head. Now, I don't know a lot about professional wrestling, but I did have the opportunity to be in the presence of a group of pro wrestlers when I trained at Gleason's Gym at 75 Front Street in Brooklyn. Johnny Rodz had his World of Wrestling school. Bruce Silverglade had 3 rings devoted to boxing, and there was a 4th ring that was solely for Johnny Rodz pro wrestling. It had those different types of pads on the corners. And the boxing rings have the full pads. The wrestling ring doesn't. It has those other types of pads on the corner. In any case, I got to witness firsthand that, there are ways that wrestlers slam each other to the ground where you're not inflicting any harm. It looks bad to those of us who don't necessarily know what's going on, right? But that's the whole point. They're trying to sell the move. So Raja, on the other hand, wasn't trying to just sell a move. He actually wanted to knock Stuart Smith unconscious, and he did. The third thing that happened in the ring was that Raja was allowed to unleash not 3, not 6, but 20 or more full force, full contact punches to the unconscious Syko Stu's head. Now, what was notable in its absence was any attempt from any of the other adults in the ring at that moment to stop Raja from punching Syko Stu. The referee was the closest person to that action, and he made 0 attempt to intervene. There was another pro wrestler with white face paint on who did make a bit of an attempt. He came behind Raja, but I think when he realized Raja was just going full force, he kind of backed off. Now, what you may not have seen on camera, depends which bit of footage you saw, there was also another pro wrestler who was reclined, just lying down right under the ropes at the edge of the ring. That person also made 0 attempt to get up and help Syko Stu, who's unconscious, clearly unconscious at this point. So finally, at about the 21st punch, another pro wrestler who finished his match and was in the audience by the name of Douglas Mallow, he's the fellow with the pink braids, he enters the ring and just yanks Raja off of Syko Stu. Now, Raja then gets into it with Douglas and tries to fight him. At this point, some of the other pro wrestlers, I guess, get their courage up, and about 5 of them kind of just get Raja into the corner of the ring. Now, here's what's not on that viral clip. It is on some other video footage that's been posted from another angle. So if Raja's at 6 o'clock, this footage looks like Raja entered the ring at 6 o'clock. It looks like this footage was shot from about 1 or 2 o'clock. It does show Douglas Mallow entering the ring. It also shows the referee counting out Syko Stu. You know how the pro wrestling refs go slam 1, 2, 3 on the canvas? That's what the referee did while the 4 or 5 other pro wrestlers have Raja in the corner. I mean, I found that just absolutely unbelievable. How could the referee not know that Syko Stu's unconscious? He needs medical attention immediately. Now, what's really the most notable in its absence was any attempt to stop Raja from leaving the venue after he assaulted Syko Stu. This I also find unbelievable. So now this recalls an event that happened in New York City all the way back in 2001. This was a pro boxing card that took place at the Roseland Ballroom in November of 2001. This was a post 9/11 tribute to all of FDNY and NYPD. So the main event of this boxing card were 2 local New York fighters. It was Richard the Alien Grant from Brooklyn versus James the Harlem Hammer Butler of Harlem. So the 2 fought to a 10-round unanimous decision. It went in Grant's favor. Now, here's where things went south. After the decision's announced, Grant still had his gloves on. He walked across the ring to, I guess, go, give a pound to James Butler and say, hey, like most pro fighters do after a fight, you hug it up, you say, hey, good fight. All the bad intentions are now over. and you just want to kind of acknowledge your opponent, because without them, there's no fight, right? So Richard reaches out to James in a show of good faith. And what does James do? Well, he already had his gloves cut off. So he sucker punches Richard Grant, knocks him out. Richard just falls straight back on his back. Apparently he bit his tongue, so now there's blood coming out of his mouth onto the canvas. He also had a broken jaw from that one single punch. So, do you think James Butler was allowed to leave the venue? Absolutely not. I mean, never mind the fact that the place was full of FDNY and NYPD. James Butler was apprehended Johnny on the spot. I mean, no one was going to let him get out of the ring. I mean, I think, well, I'm sure the commission intervened, everybody intervened. My point here is really, this guy throws one punch, knocks his opponent out after the fight. No way is he leaving the venue. Raja Jackson effectively assaults a pro wrestler in a stunt gone wrong. This pro wrestler needs medical help, and yet how is Raja Jackson allowed to leave not just the ring, but the entire venue? And he's so free that he just continues on his kick stream, right? There's no attempt to hold him and answer for his actions. That to me remains a mystery. Why did the promotion not immediately unleash their security people and say, hey, you got to hold that guy in one of these back rooms or something, we got to call 911. We certainly have to call 911 for Syko Stu, but once they arrive to take care of Syko Stu, it's pretty clear that he's been the victim of an assault. They're going to want to know what happened. So, huge question mark there for the promotion and law enforcement, because we still haven't heard anything from LAPD. Now, on a bit of a sidebar, and this is very disturbing, so I'm going to warn you up front. This same boxer, James Butler, you may recall, you may have heard of his name because, fast forward from that incident in 2001, he was the individual who was responsible for the death of Sam Kellerman, the younger brother of Max Kellerman. I'm not going to go into the gory details about that, but just be forewarned if you decide you want to look that up. So I don't want to draw a straight line from assault in the boxing ring to homicide, but this is the fact, right? This is the same individual who doesn't understand that you don't sucker punch somebody, even if you're mad that you lost, you don't sucker punch them. This is the same individual who then went on to murder somebody who he was staying with. So, okay, so that gives us a little bit of insight, I suppose, into somebody's potential for violence, right? If they give certain indicators, maybe there's a bigger potential there than we've seen thus far. So I'll leave that where it is, because there's no cold hard evidence that this is the case for Raja Jackson. I don't want to make that parallel, but there we have it. So again, my big question is, why was he allowed to just walk out of the venue? Okay, so let's go back to what happened in the ring, and let's take a look at how specific events immediately prior to that, led up to Raja assaulting Syko Stu. So the first thing I would say that was caught on the stream was that Syko Stu hit him with the beer can. This was something that happened backstage prior to the whole show. Raja was invited to this pro show by another pro wrestler named AJ Mana, who's since been fired by the promotion. But so AJ took Raja backstage to introduce him to some of the other pro wrestlers. And at a certain point, Syko Stu kind of gets up out of his seat and kind of stands face to face with Raja and says something like, "What? You don't know who Syko Stu is?" And then Raja just replies, "No." So then Syko Stu says, "Well, I'll show you." And he reaches behind himself, grabs a beer can, and he palms Raja's head and smashes the beer can against the side of Raja's head. Now, Raja doesn't move at all. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't then grab the side of his head like he's in pain. So I tend to think this was a prank that Syko Stu knew or knows how to sell, right? Like there's an art to doing all these stunts where it looks like maybe you're hitting or kicking somebody, but you're actually not. That's the whole point behind pro wrestling. So I'll assume the same thing goes with this smashing a beer can on someone's head trick, right? But in terms of streamers, I interpret that as Syko Stu is trying to create a moment. He's trying to create a little clippable moment. He knows that he's on camera because Raja's cameraman is shooting this. Certainly, Syko Stu is very aware of where cameras are, right? And in my opinion, Raja should have picked up on the point that Stu is actually helping him out by creating this sort of fake conflict moment that becomes a clippable moment. So, for example, take a look at streamers such as Ryan Garcia and Oblivion. Take a look at their little sparring session. It's not really a sparring session, right? It's fake conflict. But there's a couple of moments in that sparring session that other YouTubers and social media people have clipped. So I will say that both Ryan and Oblivion weren't actually in any type of conflict during this sparring, and even with those suspect clippable moments, this is all a cooperative act because Ryan wants a lot of views, Oblivion wants a lot of views. They both know that if they create these little moments, other people will do all the hard work for them because they're going to clip that little bit of the stream and repost it because they know that they will get a ton of views on a Ryan Garcia and Oblivion clip. So my point is, I think that's what Syko Stu was counting on, Raja sort of to pick up on. But instead, Raja gets a little bit upset, and AJ Mana kind of has to intervene a little bit. Syko Stu does extend his hand, as in, he wants to shake hands with Raja, like, everything's cool. He extends his hands a couple times. Raja refuses to shake the hand, so AJ kind of escorts him away and says, hey, they've come to an agreement that Raja will be able to get his payback in the ring. He'll get a moment to do something with Syko Stu in the ring. While they're walking through the hallway, still backstage, AJ Mana says to Raja, so be sure you get that receipt. Now, fast forward, AJ Mana has gotten a lot of heat on social media for saying that, for, as they say, amping Raja up with that statement. And AJ claims that when he said get that receipt, he meant like slapping Syko Stu, which I don't think that was communicated. AJ also speaks to a couple of people sitting down in a back office just to confirm that Raja will get his moment in the ring. So I assume these are the producers keeping an eye on what's going on in the ring and cueing people to go out and whatnot. So AJ Mana kind of hyping Raja up was the second thing that I think got Raja's adrenaline a little bit pumped up. The third thing that happened, and this was pretty key, was Rampage Jackson gave Raja a phone call because while Raja's live streaming on Kick, Rampage is also live streaming on Kick. And I guess somebody in Rampage's circle brought Raja's live stream to Rampage's attention because they could see something was going down at this pro wrestling show. So Rampage picks up the phone. All of this is caught on Rampage's live stream as well as Raja's live stream and calls Raja. So those of you who know Rampage, you know his sense of humor, and he can be a bit of an instigator. Well, he'll very sort of like even-toned, make a completely false statement towards whoever he's talking to because he knows he's trying to get a rise out of that other person, whether it's a guest on his podcast or just somebody else. He seems to enjoy doing that. And for him on his podcast, it is successful. It brings moments of humor about, but in this particular case, it didn't bring any humor to the situation. So Rampage says to Raja something like, so I hear you're hanging out with guys in tights. Is that true? And then he says something like, I heard, are you hugging up on guys in tights? And instead of, taking that as humorous or dishing it right back at Rampage, Raja just gets very angry and he tells his dad, STFU. But clearly it didn't have any there was no humor in that moment for Raja. I mean, in a sense, it was the opportunity for Raja to dish one back at Rampage, but he was not in that mode. So I think those comments from his dad just also amped up his anger level and his adrenaline. So the fourth thing that happened before Raja entered that ring was, he's looking at his kick live stream, and he's seeing all these comments from viewers saying, you're going to take that disrespect, and kind of egging him on. So now he's already amped up. He's reading these live chat comments. He gets even more amped up, like, no, I'm going to show you, I'm going to get this guy back for disrespecting me, even though it wasn't a disrespect. The guy was actually trying to help you with your live stream. So, but regardless, at this point, Raja's adrenaline is just shooting way up, right? So here's the bottom line with, I think, Raja's state of mind. I think there's really only two possibilities. The first is that Raja simply doesn't understand rules of engagement in different contexts. So what I mean by that is, if it's pro wrestling, we know this is completely cooperative. There's an agreement between us. There's actually zero conflict. We're just pretending that there's conflict for the audience. That's all it is. It's play acting. Then the next level of conflict would be, say, sparring in the gym, where you are back and forth, but there's no actual ill will towards each other. We're teammates. We're helping each other get better. So a little more conflict, but still overall cooperative, right? Okay, then there's the next level where it's actually a fight. Now I can have all the bad intentions towards you in the world. I am going to try to beat you. I'm going to try to win. But clearly, again, we're operating within a set of rules. Certain moves are not allowed. There's a certain time duration. After that, I must stop fighting you. It's called the rest, or it's called the end of the fight. So no more, right? But we understand that the rules of engagement for that fight are for that limited amount of time and that limited location where the fight occurs. Next level up from that, I suppose, I've not experienced either of these, is a street fight, right? So again, no rules, no time or location limitations here, but at a certain point, somebody's the winner, somebody's not the winner, and supposedly, at least in the past, people could shake hands and be done with it, right? It doesn't seem to be the case anymore. People just take it all the way to limitless, right? So then, of course, there's finally, something that's, you're in a situation where you're fighting for your life. So again, I've not been in that situation. Maybe Syko Stu has, because he is former military. So, I mean, in those situations, whether it's, a street fight to the death, or somebody who's serving in the military or law enforcement, or somewhere else where their life is actually on the line, then that's a whole nother level, right? And my point here is that either Raja doesn't comprehend that there's different rules of engagement for different scenarios, or he understands that, but he doesn't care. He's going to ignore that, right? Because it looks to me like Syko Stu communicated to him, hey, we are playing. We are in play mode. I'm going to help you elevate me because we want to sell this stunt. But immediately, Raja does not respond in kind. He turns and slams Syko Stu as hard as he can, knocking him out. Okay. So I guess the question here is, and I can't answer it, has Raja Jackson's prefrontal cortex, like the part of your brain that imposes logic and reasoning over emotion, has that shut off at this point? Or is this a conscious choice? I don't know, that's a big question. I think on Brandon Schaub's podcast with his friend, Fighter and the Kid, one of them, Brandon Schaub's partner, points out, well, Raja Jackson's 25. his prefrontal cortex is fully formed. And it's like, okay, perhaps that's a true statement, but that's not the point, because in this case, it's pretty clear that he's not using any rational logic, or he's decided that this is what he wants to do, right? So he is in fact using his prefrontal cortex to determine that, this guy is not trying to hurt me, but I'm going to try to hurt him as badly as I can. Okay, so big question mark. We don't know, right? We don't know if Raja Jackson simply doesn't understand rules of engagement, or he understands them and he doesn't care, or he understands them and yet he doesn't care in so much that he's made a decision to go in the opposite direction of what the rules of engagement are. In either case, the bottom line is it's pretty clear that Raja Jackson is an individual who has not yet learned how to, what we call, self-regulate. Meaning, whether you're super happy or very sad or very angry, as a young person, you have to figure out how to regulate your emotions. So this should happen in, say, pre-kindergarten to kindergarten, somewhere when the child is like 3 to 5 years old, hopefully, because they're starting to become socialized with their peers, mostly, right? Other little kids. But they have to learn that as far as anger is concerned, you don't get to act out of your anger and especially put your hands on another child. Once children get to a certain age, well, I would say 3 years old, we can start teaching them how to use little breathing exercises. And there's a whole litany of strategies to create positive reinforcement for a youngster to kind of shift their behavior towards being more positively socialized with their peer group so they can learn how to play together. And that is definitely an important part of education, because if a student is not well socialized by the time they get to, say, kindergarten, first grade, it's going to detract from their own education and from the education of the other children in the same room as them if another adult has to constantly stop any level of instruction to deal with one individual's behavior that's, say, antisocial, just to put a label on it. Okay, so my point is, this skill set wasn't given or wasn't taught to Raja early on, apparently, because he's made it all the way to age 25 without being able to regulate his anger. Now, Rampage did allude to this, I think, in a previous video, where he states that while he's set aside tuition for 2 of his kids, he set aside college funds. He says, and I set aside bail for Raja. And then Rampage goes on to add, don't anybody mess with Raja. So I think Rampage knows a little bit, he knows who his son is in terms of, the direction that he could take. I don't think Rampage maybe he was trying to add a little bit of humor there, but I think he was actually being somewhat serious, that he's not putting aside college funds for Raja, and he sees Raja as someone that, other people should know. You don't want to just mess around with him. That turned out to be, unfortunately, a little bit prescient. Okay, so finally we have a couple more points to add to the why. Why is this the case for Raja Jackson? And there's a couple pieces of very maybe disturbing information that I have not been able to confirm from multiple sources. So this may or may not turn out to be true, but it has been. I did dig this up on the internet. Of course, that does not necessarily mean this is accurate. So there's my little disclaimer. But it has been stated that that Rampage has said that Raja has not been the same since Raja's mother was killed. So no other bits of information on that. Very sad if that is the case, but it does make sense. If Raja has had to deal with that, we could understand why that's an incredibly challenging experience to try to deal with. Now, unfortunately, there's even more to add to that. There's a second bit of information that came up, which was that Rampage said that Raja's mom was on drugs while she was pregnant with him and faced, I guess, ongoing challenges with that, which is why Rampage got full custody of Raja and raised Raja with, I guess, along with the mother of some of Rampage's other kids. So again, if that's actually the case, then that does give us a little bit of an explanation for Raja's early childhood development. Because if the mom is actually taking any substances, that's going to go directly into her bloodstream and it'll get passed right along to a developing baby inside her. So I can say secondhand from speaking to a foster mom who raised two crack addicted baby boys. She told me a little bit about her experience, and God bless her, because she was a grandma. She'd already raised her own kids. They'd gone on to raise their own families, and yet she decided she would take in a couple of these baby boys who were in the foster care system. And she said that you had to be willing to just walk them all night, patting them on the back, because babies born with a crack addiction just will cry, and it's just very difficult to comfort them. So I'm saying that just to say, you can kind of extrapolate that a little bit and understand that, any baby born with some type of substance addiction or just some type, substance in their system, their brain development isn't going to be the same. Again, not a medical professional, not a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist, but that's just a broad general statement. So if that is the case with Raja, that does give us a little bit of insight into perhaps why he's come this far into adulthood, and yet it still has a lot of challenges in terms of regulating his emotions. So in that sense, looking forward, I think we can say that if Raja has these challenges, we do hope he's able to get and access the help that he needs. I would have to say that in the county of Los Angeles, there's plenty of services available, even for free. So I hope that Raja comes to some sort of understanding of himself, that he can go seek help. That's not an admission of weakness. It'll hopefully allow him to live a happier, healthier, productive life during the rest of his adulthood. Of course, we also hope that Syko Stu can make a full recovery. It'll be a long road for him, considering he's got broken facial bones and lost a lot of teeth, sustained a concussion, sustained more head trauma than any pro wrestler would anticipate, right? And finally, I hope that we do get a statement from LAPD. I hope we get a statement from the pro wrestling promoter. I hope the people involved take accountability, take responsibility for either their actions or their inactions in this case, because it's absolutely unheard of that a pro wrestler should find themselves in an actual combat scenario when their sole job is to go out there and entertain people. So those are my thoughts. You're welcome to leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's hope this matter gets resolved in a positive light for everybody involved. Thank you so much for listening.